Hey guys, today's story is a little different. Picture a small industrial workshop just outside Kansas City. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air thick with solder and ambition. I was 22, hunched over a work table stained with motor oil and dried epoxy, holding the first working prototype of the product that would go on to triple our family business's revenue. I didn't know it then, but I was building something far more explosive than a device. I was building the line they would eventually cross. My name is Ethan Kessler. I'm 30 now, an inventor, mechanical engineer, and depending on which side of the family you ask, the reason Kessler Fabrication is either surviving or crumbling. And if you think karma's slow, wait until you hear this. So, before you get pulled in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually believe that betrayal always comes back around. Drop a comment, where are you watching from? And has someone ever cut you out of something you built? Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. My father, James Kessler, started the family business in the late 80s, a custom tool and fabrication shop that built high-performance parts for agricultural machinery. He was tough, respected, and loved to talk about legacy. But legacy, as I found out, is a funny thing. It only feels noble when it's actually shared. I grew up in that shop. I swept the floors before I knew what torque was. I earned grease under my fingernails before I ever had a driver's license. I admired my father, his precision, his grit, the way his voice dropped half an octave when he was about to teach you something important. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned into a job, and the job turned into a cage. When I graduated from Kansas State with a degree in mechanical engineering, I didn't jump to the big firms or leave town like most of my classmates. I came back, voluntarily. I brought my knowledge, my fresh designs, my laptop full of concept sketches, and I told him, let's scale. We had been stagnating for years, steady work, low margins, nothing innovative. I pitched an idea that combined our machining expertise with a pressure-sensitive rotary valve I'd been working on. It could reduce fuel consumption in irrigation equipment by 17%. I ran the numbers, built a prototype, even tested it on a rig in my professor's backyard. It worked. It worked better than expected. We manufactured 10 beta units in-house. Sold out in a month. Within a year, that single product accounted for almost 40% of our revenue. I didn't ask for much, just equity. Something modest. Something fair. My father told me, we're family. We don't do contracts. I should have known better. Because 6 years later, after I'd spent over 1,000 unpaid hours improving the product line, sourcing overseas manufacturers, writing firmware, and training our technicians, I got the call. Or more specifically, a voicemail. I remember the exact moment. I was in the middle of a client meeting in Tulsa, pitching our second-gen design to a fleet manager. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. When I stepped out into the parking lot and checked it, I saw it was from my father. I listened. His voice was flat, rehearsed, clipped. Ethan, we've been reviewing the direction of the company. After a long discussion with the board, your uncle included decided to restructure. You won't be needed moving forward. Your position is being dissolved. It's nothing personal. We appreciate your contributions. That was it. A man I built alongside for nearly a decade reduced me to a position. No meeting. No warning. No dignity. At first, I thought it was a mistake. That maybe he was testing me. I called back. No answer. Texted my uncle. Nothing. I drove straight to the shop that night, keys in hand. They'd changed the locks. I stood there on the loading dock where I'd once spent an entire winter hand-polishing metal to meet a client deadline, and all I could think was, this is what family looks like when loyalty gets in the way of control. I sat in my truck for an hour. Didn't cry. Didn't scream. I just stared through the windshield into the dark and replayed the moment I handed my father the original prototype, the pride in his eyes, the pat on the back, that you've got your old man's brain, he used to say. And then I remembered something else. A conversation I had with my college mentor when I first brought the idea to life. He told me, get it protected. Don't wait. Even if it's family. Back then, I thought protecting myself meant I didn't trust them. But now, it meant I could finally breathe. Because 3 years before that voicemail, on the advice of that same professor, I filed the patent in my own name. Not Kessler Fabrication. Not James Kessler and Son. Just me. And the very product they just kicked me out over? It didn't legally belong to them. I played that voicemail 5 times that night. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because part of me couldn't believe how casually my father's voice severed something I had bled for. I knew every breath, every pause in that message by heart by the third replay. I even knew where he hesitated right after, "We've decided to restructure." Like his own mouth didn't quite believe what it was saying. But then he pushed through it, because apparently cutting out your own son doesn't sting if you say it like a corporate memo. I slept in my truck that night. Couldn't bring myself to go home. The apartment was full of blueprints, sketches, and demo parts that still smelled like the machine shop. It would have felt like sleeping in a tomb. So I sat under the parking lot lights, playing chess on my phone, eating a bag of stale trail mix, and listening to the same sentence echo in my head. "You won't be needed moving forward." The next morning, I drove to the county records office. Walked in with a copy of the patent paperwork I'd filed years ago, dry mouth, zero sleep. I asked to confirm the listing. Name of inventor Ethan Kessler. Filing date October 7th. Status active. That piece of paper was my lifeline. Everything else had been stolen. But not that. See, when I designed the original rotary valve, I wasn't just tinkering. I was documenting. I kept design journals. I emailed CAD files to my college advisor for timestamp verification. I uploaded my working prototypes to private archives. And when I filed, I listed myself as sole inventor. The company? Not mentioned. We never had a written IP agreement. My dad didn't believe in contracts, remember? Family did things on handshakes. That handshake was now dust. But the filing was iron. For a few days, I heard nothing. No follow-up. No apology. They went silent, like they were hoping I'd crawl away. Disappear. Maybe sell off my tools and go consult for someone else. That's how these things usually go in family-run businesses. You get absorbed into the legend, then quietly removed when the legend doesn't like what it sees in you anymore. But I wasn't going to disappear. I watched from a distance. On the company's Instagram page, they announced a bold new direction and leadership restructuring. They'd removed all references to me from the website. My photo at the bottom of the About Us page? Gone. My name on the patent summary they'd bragged about for years? Quietly edited out. They even renamed the rotary valve, called it the K-Flow Gen 3. Same internal mechanism. Same schematics. My schematics. I watched their marketing roll out with clinical detachment. Like a surgeon studying a patient who doesn't yet realize they're terminal. They had no idea that every post, every announcement, every sale, every invoice using that product was now traceable to mean unauthorized. I wasn't just the ghost of the business. I was its silent owner. They'd stolen the factory floor, but I owned the floor plan. My uncle, who'd served on the company board for over 2 decades, emailed me once. Said, "This wasn't personal, Ethan. It's just business." We had to evolve. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the email, screenshotted it, and filed it under supporting exhibits. Because I was preparing something of my own. I reached out to a lawyer in Tulsa named Daryl Shawquiet Guy, built like a bulldozer in a suit. He specialized in intellectual property enforcement. I told him everything. Showed him the timelines, the filings, the product specs. He listened without interrupting once. Then he said, "They've been selling without license?" I nodded. "Then let's shut them down," he said. But I told him no, not yet. I didn't want to kill the company. I wanted them to believe they'd won. To keep building their little empire on my foundation. To get comfortable, complacent, blind. And then, when the timing was perfect, I'd pull the only thread holding the whole thing together. I watched my father give a keynote at a regional manufacturing expo 2 months later. A friend sent me a video of it. There he was, in front of a screen flashing diagrams I had drawn, calling it the result of 3 generations of innovation. I paused the video, looked at the blue and silver slide he was pointing at. I had designed that layout in a motel room after a 16-hour drive to fix a client's field unit alone. He hadn't shown up for that trip. Said it was too last minute. I'd gone anyway. That slide was mine. The applause at the end of his speech didn't bother me. Neither did the handshake line or the regional award they handed him afterward. Because I knew what was coming. Because when they cut me out of the family, they forgot one thing. The product didn't come from their name. It came from my mind. The mistake people make when they steal from someone they underestimate is thinking there won't be consequences. My father had that kind of confidence, quiet, generational confidence. The kind you wear like an old watch and never question. He believed the family name was the product, that the business would outlast whoever came and went, that he could remove me like a gear from a machine and it would keep running just fine. So I let him believe that. While they launched their third-generation innovation campaign and gave interviews about the future of Kessler fabrication, I started building a case quietly, deliberately. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in leverage. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that waits. Daryl and I spent weeks laying the groundwork. We pulled purchase orders, matched them against production runs, tracked SKUs that contained my patented mechanism. Every part sold, every invoice issued, every unit that left the warehouse using my design was now a line item in what Daryl called a clear-cut infringement trail. But I didn't file the cease and desist yet. I wanted more than proof. I wanted a pattern. So I waited. And while I waited, I built something else. See, back when I was still with the company, I'd begun drafting a next-gen design. Version 4. Smaller, faster, easier to manufacture. At the time, we shelved it. Too much risk, my father said. We've got a hit, why complicate it? But I knew it was better, more efficient. So I kept working on it at night, on weekends, in a garage I shared with a guy who built custom motorcycles. 3 months after the voicemail, I filed a second patent. Full utility protection, new casing design, updated flow logic. And this time, I didn't file under just my name, I filed under a new LLC I'd created, EK Motion Systems. No more family name. No more shadow. EK Motion was just me. I built a prototype using 3D printed parts and parts one machine myself. I demoed it at a low-profile trade conference under a pseudonym. People were interested. A few asked where they could buy it. I told them, soon. Meanwhile, back at Kessler Fabrication, things were looking good on the surface, but the cracks were forming. An old friend who still worked in sales told me they'd overcommit on orders, trying to ride the press wave. They're expanding capacity without streamlining output, he said. Pushing too hard, too fast. That's the danger of believing your own hype. And while they pushed, I watched. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, a licensing deal. A mid-sized equipment manufacturer based in Nebraska reached out after seeing my Gen 4 demo. They wanted exclusive distribution. I wasn't even officially selling yet, but they'd run tests, compared it to the K-Flow Gen 3, and wanted in early. We ran it through stress tests, the engineering lead told me. It's cleaner, more efficient, and requires 20% less maintenance. That was my proof of concept. Not just that I could build something better, but that the market wanted it. And they didn't care about the Kessler name. They wanted performance. I signed the agreement. 2 months later, EK Motion Systems had its first official product line. We didn't make a public announcement. No flashy website. Just quiet, direct sales to early adopters. But word spread. Fast. One by one, the distributors that Kessler had leaned on started asking questions. About support. About specs. About updates they were promised but never received. Because while my father had been busy polishing the K-Flow story, he hadn't updated the product in over a year. I didn't need to say a word. His silence did it for me. Then Daryl filed the cease and desist. It wasn't dramatic. No press release. No social post. Just a packet delivered to the Kessler front office, timestamped, notarized, signed. It contained a detailed breakdown of every product line infringing on my patent, the exact dates of unauthorized use, and a deadline to comply. Cease production. Halt all sales. Remove all references. I was at a diner when the email hit my inbox. Notice served. Awaiting response. I didn't smile. I just looked out the window at a delivery truck rolling past with the Kessler logo on its side and thought, you spent so long trying to erase me you forgot who built the floor you're standing on. 3 days passed. No response. On day 4, my uncle called. I let it go to voicemail. Day 5, my mother emailed. Can we talk about this as a family? Too late. They'd made it business first. Family only when convenient. And now, business was exactly what they were losing. My father finally called on day 6. This time, I answered. He said, you really want to burn it down? I said, you already did. I just own the water now. And I hung up. The Kessler name had always been their shield. A legacy forged in grease, sweat, and Midwestern pride. For decades, that name stood for something, or at least, they believed it did. My father, especially, wore that belief like armor. But legacy means nothing when it's propped up by stolen work. And that's exactly what they had done. After the cease and desist landed on their desk, I gave them time to retreat, to take responsibility, to show even a sliver of decency. Instead, they doubled down. 2 weeks later, they announced the launch of a new product, what they called the Keiko valve. Same shell, same internal specs, different name. A coat of green paint, a few buzzwords about sustainability, and suddenly they acted like it was something new. But it wasn't new. It was mine. They scheduled a launch event in Wichita, polished expo hall, catered food, rented photographers. A celebration of theft disguised as innovation. I didn't plan on going at first, but curiosity pulled me there. I showed up under an alias, EK Motion hat low over my eyes, wearing a vendor badge and silence like armor. I stood in the back, watching them parade around a product they didn't understand. They presented CAD animations I had drawn by hand, used technical terminology I had written into manuals. My father stood at the podium, spouting words like efficiency and integrity, as if he could summon truth by repeating it enough times. When the audience clapped, he smiled, shoulders squared, like he believed he'd rewritten history right there in front of us. I didn't approach him, didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because while he was taking pictures with county officials and posing for press shots, my legal team filed a new motion, this time for injunctive relief. Not just to stop the sales, but to freeze them entirely. A full commercial halt on any product using my patented design, no matter what label they slapped on it. The very next morning, the story broke. A small business outlet ran the headline first. Kessler Fabrication faces lawsuit over valve patent. Within hours, bigger publications picked it up. Then came the distributor cancellations. One by one, companies started backing out. Clients who had lined up pre-orders for the new Keiko valve pulled deposits. Suppliers began holding shipments. And by the end of the week, even their biggest logistics partner issued a temporary suspension. It wasn't just that I had the patent. It was that I had proof they knew it. Email trails, design archives, meeting notes with my name on every page. For every lie they told the public, I had 3 documents to bury it. And the worst part for them? I never raised my voice. I never posted a single thing online. My silence spoke louder than any PR statement they could throw together. But what truly shattered the illusion was the internal recording I received from one of their own. A board meeting, tense and quiet, where their shareholders grilled my father. Why didn't we just license the design when we had the chance? Someone asked. My uncle fumbled through a half answer, and my father, usually so sure, stared at a sales graph on the projector screen, now red and dipping. We thought we could repackage it, he said, voice lower than I'd ever heard. Another board member replied, "You thought wrong." The man who once told me contracts were unnecessary, who believed handshakes meant loyalty, was now choking on every deal made in ignorance. His silence in that room was more honest than any word he'd ever spoken to me. Meanwhile, I launched. EK Motion's Gen 4 valve hit the market with no fanfare. No speech, no ribbon cutting, just a clean landing page, a spec sheet, and a product that worked better, lasted longer, and required no story to sell it. Orders came in slow at first, then picked up momentum. One satisfied customer turned into 5, then 20, then distributors began to circle back. They didn't care about last names. They cared about performance. And mine delivered. Every order was a quiet vote for the truth. My father once told me, reputation is everything. He was right. But he never realized you have to earn it every day, or it becomes just another name etched on a sign no one trusts anymore. And now, the name they tried to erase me from was unraveling. Not by fire. Not by sabotage. Just by facts. They gave me silence when I asked for fairness. So I gave them the same. Only mine came with documentation, delivery logistics, and federal protections. What they called legacy I now owned in practice. Because you don't need to carry the family name when you're the one who designed the foundation it stood on. 3 weeks after the injunction was delivered to their front desk, everything at Kessler Fabrication began to slow, like an aging engine choking on its own fumes. Orders trickled to a halt. Emails went unanswered. Customer service lines jammed with complaints, and longtime partners began asking questions no one at the top could answer without lying or swallowing the bitter truth. They had erased my name from the website, wiped my photo off the About page, but I was still there in the silence, in the confusion, in the way they kept circling the problem they refused to name. They thought cutting me out was a clean break. What they never realized was that they hadn't just cut me out, they'd severed the only artery keeping their product alive. I stayed quiet. Let them sit with it. Let them squirm. They started to float trial balloons, whispers about revisiting a licensing agreement, perhaps a late-stage negotiation. But I didn't respond. They hadn't felt it deep enough yet. Then the video came, an internal board meeting, leaked by someone who had once helped me build my first prototype in the back workshop. The footage was grainy, but I didn't need crystal clarity to see the dread. My father sat at the head of the table, his usual certainty hollowed out. My uncle sat to his right, his knuckles white, lips thin. Even my mother, who had rarely engaged in business operations, was there, stiff and silent, her eyes not on the projector screen but somewhere distant, like watching the collapse of a story she'd rehearsed for years. On the screen, the company's sales graph bled red down the page, 60% drop in revenue. Their biggest distributors had walked. Regional press had started using the phrase infringement case in every article. Industry whispers had turned into boardroom sirens. A younger board member, someone they used to call the intern, with a smirk was the one who finally said it out loud. We built the last 5 years on Ethan's design. You can dress it up as legacy, but legally, it's theft. And now it's killing us. My father said nothing. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny it. He just stared at the table, his thumb tapping a nervous rhythm only he could hear. My mother's jaw clenched, but she still said nothing. No apology. No regret. Just a wall of silence they'd all helped build. That's when I knew they were finally listening. The next day, Daryl and I sent an offer, not for licensing, for acquisition. I didn't want to negotiate around the truth anymore. I wanted to own it. We offered to purchase outright the entire K-Flow product line, the manufacturing rights, distribution contracts, technical documentation, branding assets, everything built atop my original work. The number wasn't aggressive. It was fair. And it came with one condition. They would no longer sell or advertise any variation of the valve under the Kessler name. For a few days, I heard nothing. Then the resistance began. My father called the offer insulting. My uncle sent a response that said the proposal would disgrace the family legacy. And my mother, in a move that was so typically her, emailed me 2 lines. You wouldn't have existed without us. Don't forget that. I didn't reply, because the board overruled them. When a company's drowning, ego becomes a luxury. I knew they'd take the deal not because they respected me, but because they had no choice. The sale closed 1 week later, in a sterile downtown conference room with no windows and too much air conditioning. My father sat across from me, suit perfectly tailored, face perfectly unreadable. My uncle signed every document with a scowl. My mother didn't attend. The room was filled with attorneys, witnesses, silence. When the final paper slid across the table and I signed it, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. And when it was done and everyone began packing up, my father stood slowly and said, "You really did it." His voice wasn't angry. It was something worse, quiet. Small. Defeated. I looked him in the eye and said, "You taught me how to build. You just never imagined I'd build something without you." I left the building without looking back. A week later, I visited the old warehouse not as an heir, not as an employee, but as a new owner. Everything looked the same. Same scent of metal and dust. Same machines. But the energy was different. The fear had been replaced by something else. One of the engineers I used to drink coffee with late at night nodded at me from across the floor. "Didn't think we'd see you back," he said. I told him, I never really left. Because I hadn't. They tried to erase me. But you can't erase the one who drew the blueprint. Owning something on paper is different from owning it in truth. I thought once the transfer was signed and the ink dried, the moment would feel loud, vindicating. But it didn't. It felt still. It felt like standing in a house that used to belong to someone else and realizing you no longer need permission to breathe. That was the moment I understood I hadn't just won a legal battle. I had reclaimed the years they'd spent trying to make me feel temporary. There was no celebration, no champagne, just me sitting alone in my apartment, hands still warm from signing documents that changed everything and changed nothing. My name was now tied to the patent, to the product line, to the accounts. But it wasn't about names anymore. It was about clarity. I had walked through fire and come out on the other side not as a victim, not even as a hero, just as someone who finally stopped apologizing for being right. EK Motion Systems became mine in more than title. I breathed it, shaped it. I didn't bring in flashy investors or make noise in the media. I hired smart, paid fairly, treated every supplier like a partner, not an afterthought. And within months, I saw something I never saw when I worked for my family. Pride that didn't have to be forced. People stayed late because they wanted to. Clients signed on because they believed. The product spoke for itself. We didn't market legacy. We marketed performance. And that performance delivered. Our numbers rose steadily, not explosively, but cleanly, reliably. The kind of growth that doesn't collapse under its own hype. At trade expos, I stood behind the booth, not in front. I watched people pick up our valves and turn them in their hands like puzzles finally solved. No one asked about Kessler. No one cared. That story was over. They had tried to bury me under the weight of their legacy, forgetting I was the one who laid the foundation to begin with. And now, they were the forgotten ones. I heard from old contacts that the Kessler brand had shifted its focus, trying to salvage what was left with low-cost parts and overseas manufacturing deals. The core team had splintered. My father was no longer CEO. My uncle had retired early. And my mother had all but disappeared from anything public. I didn't follow the details closely, not out of avoidance, but because I didn't need to. You only look back when you feel unfinished. I didn't. Still, one letter arrived that I couldn't ignore. It was handwritten, in my mother's exact cursive, sharp, slanted, emotionally distant even on the page. She wrote that she'd watched our new Gen 4 promotional video. That she remembered the early drawings I once left on the kitchen table when I was 19. She said, "I didn't think it would ever work. I suppose I was wrong." No apology. No explanation. Just a sentence of reluctant acknowledgement, like a receipt someone forgot to hand you until years too late. I folded it neatly and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't feel anger. Just a strange, hollow tenderness for a version of her that might have meant those words. But some damage doesn't undo. It just becomes quieter with time. I never replied. What would I say that silence hadn't already answered? In the final months of the year, EK Motion Systems began shipping to international clients. We landed our first multinational industrial contract in Germany and a sustainable energy partnership out of Toronto. And at the year's last expo in Phoenix, a young engineer from a startup leaned across our table and said, "We've been watching you. What you built, it's not just technical. It's personal." He didn't mean it as a compliment. He meant it as a mirror. I nodded, because he was right. The design was always personal. It wasn't revenge-fueled, it was integrity-fueled. Built from the same parts they dismissed me for, now functioning better without them. And finally, I went back one last to Meadow, the building where it all started. The old Kessler warehouse had been gutted. Someone new had leased the space, stripped the walls, repainted the exterior, erased the signage. There was no trace of the empire they'd once built or the battle that followed. I stood outside the gate for a long time, hands in my jacket pockets, breathing in the scent of distant metal and rain. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done, the way a chapter ends not with punctuation, but with breath. I turned around and walked away. Revenge doesn't always come with fire or fury. Sometimes, it arrives in stillness, the kind that fills a room after everyone else has left. That's how this ended. Not with confrontation or shouting matches, but with quiet ownership. I didn't burn their name to the ground. I just built something stronger beside it and waited for the wind to blow. What they tried to take from me wasn't just a patent or a paycheck, it was the right to define my own worth. They handed my brother praise, gave my ideas a second-hand home, and left me on the outside of something I helped build. But the thing about building is, once you learn how, you can do it again. Stronger, cleaner, smarter. And when it's yours, truly yours, it no longer needs to be louder than theirs. It just has to last longer. I've learned that the deepest power doesn't come from vengeance, it comes from clarity. From knowing what was taken and knowing you didn't have to become small to survive it. That voicemail, the one that tried to sever me from the family business, was never the end. It was the start of a different story, one they don't get to narrate. And if they ever do think about me now, maybe it's not with regret or even guilt. Maybe it's just silence. The kind that stings because it knows it can't go back. So if you've ever been cast aside, cut out, told you're replaceable, then fight to get back in. Build something outside their reach. Then let them watch from behind their walls as your lights stay on, long after theirs flicker out.